Alright, so here's a little update on the educational news front. So you might remember a couple of weeks or months ago I did a video based on a Schoolsweek article which looked into what had been discovered since Ofqual had met with the selected committee. And of course they made quite a few claims about meetings that they had had with the Education Secretary and the Department for Education, and how that had basically influenced what happened and the mess that we ended up having to deal with during those summer results for GCSE, A levels, and so on. Well, what they've now done is they've actually supplied the evidence, those minutes for the meetings that they had, and it does pretty much spell out what happened, and it does shows where some of the blame lies. What Schoolsweek have done, because once again I'm using a Schoolsweek article as the base for this video, is they've summed it up quite nicely, and I'm just going to in turn sum it up quite nicely for you. So just narrow that down a bit so it's easier to process. So quite interestingly, one of the first things that I've noticed is that Ofqual and the Department for Education actually met 154 times during that sort of time period, and 55 of those meetings were actually about the exam specifically. So they had loads of meetings about this, hundreds. So the discussions were taking place. Students were not simply shoved aside. This was something that they really wanted to solve. And even more interestingly, according to the minutes of one of the meetings held not long before the A level results dropped, the Minister for Education was already considering CAGs as an option. So you know how they sort of rejected it, or he vocally rejected it when he was asked. It would appear that it was on the table as one of the options, alongside using mocks as well. Okay, these weren't new things which sprang out of nowhere. They had been considered before. And this meeting was actually held in the first place because people were starting to lose that confidence in Ofqual and in the way that the education system was being run, because of those standardized grades, because of what was going on with the algorithm and what it was doing. So this must have been pretty close to the actual A-level exams being exam results being released, because you know that's when it really reached peak, that lack of confidence. And you might remember even I was like, what's going on at the, during that time back in early August, late July. The second thing that we learned was also something quite surprising about the triple lock system. You might remember that system which came with the announcement of the mock results being able to be used as results. And according to the minutes in a meeting in or on August the 11th, the idea was still being reviewed by Ofqual when it was announced to the public, or when it went round to the public. And that's messy. That's messy. Because who knows what would have happened if that hadn't happened, if Ofqual had managed to say that piece and come to a proper conclusion before that information went out. Because maybe they would have said, no, let's not do that. And, you know, they would have saved a bit of face. They wouldn't have looked a bit ridiculous trying to make sense of it afterwards. Thirdly, once that triple lock announcement was made and the announcement linked to the mocks, Ofqual were basically aware that they were in a difficult situation. That's what they said. I think that's a polite way of saying it. If I was them, I'd be pretty annoyed. But you know, they said that they were aware they were in a difficult situation now, and they were basically aware of all the problems that everybody, myself included, raised about using mocks. It's problematic, and they knew that. They thought that it essentially, and this is a quoting from the article, diluted and compromised the standardization process, and also that it disadvantaged private students. And when I say private students or private candidates, that's people who weren't in schools, say, for example. And also, of course, they acknowledged all the other issues that came with it as well. The fourth thing that we pick up in this article is also that the chief regulator of Ofsted at the time, that's Sally Collier, she was already a big supporter of the CAGs from fairly early on in the mess, and she looked like she was actually willing to go against Gavin Williamson. She was ready to just get Ofqual to announce, hey, we're going to go with the CAGs, even before it was okayed. But the board shut down that proposal. They said, nope, we're going to go along with what we've been told to go along with, which is fair enough. It's sort of their job. And they put out more guidance on appeals and appealing the mocks. Of course, after this, there was the massive U-turn. So Ofqual had to essentially accept, in the end, that not only had they made themselves look a bit bad, well, look a lot bad, but also that some of the grades were going to be unreliable. It was too late to really do anything about those, because by the point of the U-turn, the A-levels were already out and the GCSEs were going to be out in a few days. So they just accepted and said people would have to accept as well that some of the results would be unreliable, and that some centres and schools would have different grade distributions than they have in the past. And that was something that, apart from the appeals process, which of course wasn't really much of a process in my opinion, apart from the appeals process, there's not really much that could be done about that. The rest of the information in that article, because there are some other points as well, it's mostly to do with personnel change and shifts happening within Ofqual and the internal politics of that. So I don't really think that's relevant for students and parents. But I think those points that I brought up, those 4 main points, are the major ones that, you probably want to know. And it's really interesting because this basically implies that Ofqual did have their head screwed on. They did know what might result from some of the choices that were being made or some of the stuff that was being discussed. They did bring up a lot of the problems that everybody else, you students, the parents, the teachers, commentators brought up. They did see this stuff, but they were just trying to do the best in a very awkward situation. At the same time, we also must acknowledge that this is information being provided by Ofqual for a very specific reason. So there will be a hint of bias. There is undoubtedly more to this story, and it would be interesting to hear it from other angles as well, and hear what maybe the Department of Education would say on this, or even Gavin Williamson himself, because of course he's occupied with other stuff right now. So it's interesting. I think it does win back a little bit of Qual's credibility, and although they're going to have to work to re-earn it fully, because I think a lot of people have been hard done by this entire thing, and a lot of people have been in mental anguish because of everything that's gone on. But it is interesting to hear this side of it. The big question in my opinion though is, what are they going to do moving forward? And this is the education system as a whole. Are they going to learn from their mistakes, or are they going to keep repeating this sort of reactionary and almost ruthless sort of approach to how they make these decisions? So there's a lot of unknowns coming up with the 2021 exams, and of course the set to follow that, because both of those have been impacted by everything that's happened recently. So let's see what they choose to do moving forward, and how they're going to tackle ensuring the future is nice and safe and secure for the young people that are currently in education and currently leaving education. Okay, so that's all for today. Of course, as you probably noticed, I'm not covering as much of this educational news as I normally would, or as I was before, because really there's not that much happening that's super relevant to the students, and I'd rather put more of my time into creating resources and really interesting videos that people can learn from and use practically, not just in terms of being informed about things that are beyond their control. So I will still keep updating you when important things do pop up, but be aware that it won't be at the same frequency as it has been or was during the summer. So that's all for today. Please don't forget to subscribe and like and drop a comment if you can. And that's all. Thanks for listening. Until next time.